thank you all again for coming, and we have high standards to live up to. The first two panels, which were really a terrific substantive discussion, and this one will be too, I'm sure. We have, of course, Congresswoman Jane Harman and Congressman John McHugh, a Democrat and a Republican. I'm sure we'll see fierce partisan sparring here. We won't. Actually, I was on the trip to Munich for the Verkunde, the National Security Conference, with Jane Harman, and we were planning this conference, and I asked if she would come, and she was kind enough to say if she could work it out in her schedule, she would. And I said, what Republican member would you recommend for a thoughtful and serious discussion? And she said, John McHugh. And then I saw Mr. McHugh about 2 or 3 weeks ago to talk about the defense budget, and I said, we hadn't quite finalized this, and I said, what Democratic member would you recommend? And he said, Jane Harman. So, but despite that, we'll have right. But no, but actually, the truth is, these are two of the most thoughtful members of Congress on national security matters. Jane Harman was ranking member of the House Intelligence Committee, now chairman of the Intelligence Subcommittee of Homeland Security. Mr. McHugh is ranking member on House Armed Services. Both, I think, came to the House in the same year, in 1993. Is that right?
We served on armed services.
And served on armed services together.
He was much younger, though.
And
True.
I'll stay out of that. And it is, thank you. It's an awfully busy time, obviously, this week in Washington and on the Hill. So thank you both for coming. Congresswoman Harman will speak for 10 minutes or so from the podium, and then Mr. McHugh, and then we'll have a discussion about the points that they raise. Mrs. Harman.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. I want to thank Bill and congratulate Dan. I don't know where Dan is, father-to-be for the second time in another week, on founding a new organization. What Washington needs is another think tank, but what Washington does need is thoughtful people coming together to think about the issues. And many people in this new organization are people I've known for many years and interact with regularly. Bill didn't tell you the whole story of the Munich delegation this year. Here's the deal. John will find this amusing. At the last minute, the 7 senators who were part of the 10-member delegation, 3 from the House, 3 members from the House, and 7 from the Senate, had to cancel because there was an all-weekend enlightening conversation about, I think it was, the stimulus package. So they couldn't come. That left the House delegation in charge. That's a good start. The House delegation was Harman, Taucher, and Sanchez, all female, all Californians. So I announced as the senior member that we were going to have a slumber party on the plane. Bill was extremely uncooperative. He's clueless about what women do. On the other hand, this is a good start. John McHugh gets it. We were elected together. We served together on armed services for years. We served together on intelligence for years. And he is thoughtful, enlightened. I didn't remember that's a cute story that we suggested each other to do this, but why not? And so, of course, we're going to agree. Or if we don't agree, John McHugh will learn in the next few weeks that I was right. At any rate, I appreciate the invitation to be here. Many of you are my friends. I think it is just absolutely critical that we are thoughtful and deliberative about the tough challenges facing the United States. And I have been panned a bit for agreeing to come down here in the blog world because the new neocon organization, what's Harman doing in the new neocon organization? My answer is I'm talking to some friends. And I'm, representing perhaps a different point of view, but when there's a tough job to do, I think a woman needs to do it. So, some are saying, we're talking about Afghanistan, right? Some are saying that this breaks down to 2 points of view. One is the, quote, Republican view, which is that the Bush muscular approach in Iraq worked, and let's use it again in Afghanistan. And, oh, by the way, if that doesn't work, let's call the Afghanistan adventure Obama's war. This is the alleged Republican view. The alleged Democratic view is that the British and the Soviets failed to win in Afghanistan, and therefore, should we continue to be there, it will become a Vietnam-like quagmire for the U.S. too. And that is a point of view that I have heard expressed by some people who are Democrats. But not surprisingly, I disagree with both views. And I think that Obama's take on this is pretty close to my view, and I have read some comments by some of you, I won't reveal your names, that are pretty positive about the Obama approach because it is both a potential kinetic approach, but it also has many other dimensions. And so let me just talk about it, or talk about how I see it and why I think it's the way to go. First of all, I would sort of put my views in three baskets about what we need to do about Afghanistan and the region. One, I think we do need to limit our objective to making certain there's no sanctuary in Afghanistan or Pakistan for our adversaries. But that limited objective has to be in a context. And that context has to be that we are helping both Afghanistan and Pakistan to develop good governance. And why do I think that matters? I think only if there is adequate governance and civil capacity in these countries, which there is not now in either of them, will there be the public buy-in necessary to achieve the objective of no sanctuary for our adversaries. Second, I think that the U.S. strategy in this region must be population-focused. This relates to my first point, not enemy-focused. Basic law and order do not exist in most parts of Afghanistan, for example. So, obviously, as we all know, village leadership warlords and Taliban-style justice have filled the gaps. That is not a good situation. The current U.S. practice, or what has been U.S. practice, to support warlords, I think has led to massive amounts of, or fed massive amounts of corruption in the country. And that's not good for any successful strategy. So I think we need to invest much more heavily in something that I believe Obama plans to do, and that is helping Afghan-style PRTs, much as we helped Iraqi-style PRTs succeed by providing the right advisors and trainers and so on and so forth, and very targeted expertise. Finally, last point, to paraphrase from Hillary Clinton, it takes a region, not just a village, and an engaged international community to root out the Taliban and stabilize the area. I think Richard Holbrooke is right to call the area AFPAC. That seems to have taken hold. But it's not just AFPAC. It's also India and the entire region that is relevant. And in case anyone missed it, there's a conference starting today at The Hague, and I think that conference is probably the right setting to roll out this more nuanced, I think, better U.S. policy. And it is a test of a lot of things. It's a test of NATO, it's a test of Obama's leadership, and it's a test of a lot of folks who are going to be there, including, interestingly, Iran. It will be interesting to see what they say. There was an article in the paper, I think today, about Iran talking about the narco traffic in Afghanistan and why that matters to Iran. So let's just see what comes out of that. And by the way, I don't think our new policy, is perfect. I thought there was a very good suggestion yesterday from Doug Feith. I don't know, is Doug here? No. Why isn't Doug here to listen to me? Who wrote in yesterday's New York Times that our efforts need to be accompanied by a communications strategy for the region. I think this is absolutely right. They have one. We don't. I see Ashley nodding. Hi, Ashley. How are you? And, you know, it's kind of ironic that folks who would take us back to the 7th century are more advanced communicators than we are. But they are, and we lack a communication strategy at our peril. I think I've covered my basic points. I think that the choice of 4,000 trainers, U.S. trainers, I gather NATO may provide some more, is about the right number. I think that surging in other ways. Economic and diplomatic help is exactly right. And I think that the final goal of the strategy, which is ridding the Afghan economy, at least focusing on Afghanistan, from a reliance on drugs, a drug-based economy is critical. The drug-based economy of Afghanistan threatens the entire region, and that is a good reason why, again, I think Iran is at the table in The Hague today. Richard Holbrooke's Agricultural Assistance Initiative is the kind of program that can work, but if we're going to transition Afghanistan to growing other crops, we also have to guarantee that those crops can get to market. And guaranteeing safe transit across a series of countries, given who's blocking the roads, is a very hard task, and it's one that we in NATO and hopefully the Afghans are going to have to work at. So, what is our goal? Our goal is to eliminate the sanctuary and put both AF and PAC on a much more secure and stable footing. The brutal attacks in PAC yesterday are a signal that this is could be getting harder, not getting easier. And, oh, by the way, another thing I think that is still an impediment to our getting Pakistan policy right is their refusal to let us question A.Q. Khan, who I continue to believe may be, by their lights, the father of their nuclear industry, but by my lights, he's an international outlaw who had more to do with the nuclear sophistication of North Korea and Iran probably than any other person. And I was never persuaded. I don't know what John's view is, based on briefings I got on the intelligence community, that we knew we had wrapped up his network. So I think questioning him and making certain we know what he knows is something we should absolutely insist on. We have under-resourced Afghanistan for too long. I think Friday was signaling a course correction. We took our eye off the ball while we were bogged down in Iraq. I'm not arguing about the late surge, but I think for a few years we did not have a plan that made any sense in Iraq, and all of our resources had to be devoted to that region, especially intelligence resources, which deprived us of really knowing about the Taliban resurgence in Afghanistan. So let me just finally say that I'm not sure how this ends or when this ends, but a key will be, and this was part of what Obama announced, the provision of metrics to measure our success. I had a conversation with Admiral Mullen this morning. I ran into him and I said, so where are the metrics? And he said, they exist. I said, well, so what are they? And he said, well, we're not sure we're going to discuss those publicly. Well, that may be a good strategy. I don't know. But I think that Congress, as an independent branch of government, let us remember that even though the last administration thought we were a nuisance, and sometimes we are, and sometimes we're dysfunctional, let us remember that we are an independent branch of government, and I think something we could productively do is both in open and closed sessions make certain that there are good metrics to apply to Afghanistan, and that whatever they are, those benchmarks are being achieved. And if they're not achieved, something happens. We have to hold this administration accountable for its plan in Afghanistan. A lot of our treasure, both human and financial, whatever's left of the second, are going to have to be spent in Afghanistan, and I certainly want us to have a very careful, clear-eyed view of what the stakes are there. I personally think they're high. I would hope we will do well. I think the President's on the right track, and I'm here to help, and I obviously know we're going to do Q&A. So please welcome the real act, John McHugh.
That felt like a setup, but I'll roll with it. We always try to learn. I've been here about 10 minutes on stage, and I've learned a few things. One, that Jane Harman is very modest, because in every dealing I've ever had with either a member of Congress or the State Department, when they've just come back from wherever the hell it is you're talking about, they say, well, having just returned from the region. She just returned from Afghanistan yesterday, and she never mentioned that. And how she could roll off a plane and look this great as she always does is amazing to me as well. The thing that really didn't surprise me as I was reading the press as I came over here this morning, it was all McCain to do panel, McCain and Harmon to talk about issues. You had to go about page 14 to find that I was going to be here. It was kind of like, I know when I die on a plane crash, it'll say also killed, but I truly am honored. I truly am honored to be here, whatever page or paragraph I appear in. And I, in all seriousness, want to say I could not share a stage with someone who I more admire and I more appreciate the intellect of than Jane Harmon. We're both fugitives now from the Intelligence Committee, and I don't know about you, Jane, but I feel much more intelligent for it. But maybe we can talk about that a bit later. Thank you to FPI. Thank you to Bill, Dan, and others who have worked so hard to create this new body that, as Jane suggested, may not on a numerical value be absolutely necessary, but from an intellectual value, and I do believe is that. Bill and Jane both were kind enough to talk about my intellect, so I want to start on that high level, and let me begin by quoting that font of great American wisdom, Homer Simpson, who once said, you know, I don't care what situation you're dealing with in life, you really only need 3 phrases. The first is, cover for me. The second is, sounds good to me, boss. And the third is, look like that when I got here. What's the point? The point is, when then candidate Barack Obama was out on the campaign trail last fall, he spent a great deal of effort trying to recast Afghanistan as the good war, the just war, the war we had to win. I don't know this, but I suspect, particularly leading up to the release of the announcement of the new strategy last week, on one occasion, he had to think, let's throw up our hands and say, look like that when we got here, and propose a strategy that was more narrowly focused, that was clearly, at least in the short term, less expensive in terms of blood and treasure, that probably was far less difficult in terms of his political base. And I want to start off by saying he didn't do that, and I want to thank him, and I want to give him credit. By saying we are going to take a whole-of-theater approach, by saying we recognize that both Pakistan and Afghanistan are linked in sometimes subtle, sometimes very overt, but very important ways, by recognizing that we have to build our both military and civilian capabilities and capacities both in Iraq and Pakistan, or Iraq, both Afghanistan and Pakistan, by recognizing that we have to re-engage our ISAF and NATO partners in more and hopefully productive ways, and on and on and on. I can only say to the President, sounds good to me, boss. But I got to tell you, this is the start of the road, and Jane mentioned this in her comments. This is where it gets interesting. This is kind of like the part of the movie toward the end when the lights go off, the thunder and lightning strikes, and you find out there's a really creepy creature in your midst. In our house, there's about potentially 435 very scary creatures. We're called representatives, thank you. But I have to tell you, as Jane said, Congress matters. We're going to have a play in this process, and I don't care if you go back to Vietnam. I don't care if you discuss the debate that occurred in the 06 and 07 Iraq surge. Congress has a way of influencing and transporting its opinions into executive policy. I suspect, I didn't get a chance to talk to him directly, but I suspect that's why President Bush vetoed not 1 but 2 wartime supplemental bills, the recognition that, yeah, money's important, but there were very significant inhibitors on how and what ways we could use our troops in those kinds of circumstances. So we've got to become very realistic with the fact that, look, I'm sure you heard, I did not hear the first two panels, but I'm sure there was a great deal of informed analysis. I'm certain as well that as we go forward from this point, there'll be a great deal of very serious discussion amongst serious scholars. But to be effective, foreign policy can't stop at the think tank door. It's got to be carried through the halls of Congress and onto the president's desk. We saw it in Iraq, and I suspect in some way, yet to be determined, we're going to see it in Afghanistan. Now, I don't want to suggest to you that the political road that we saw in the development of the Iraq debate will be the same this year as it was at that time. It won't. But I do believe that the similarities, when properly applied, can instruct us, and the differences, if we look at them wisely, should inform us. And obviously, the most clear difference is the fact we now have an administration that is of the same party, of the majority party of both houses in Congress. What does that mean? Well, we're going to have a debate on this. But what it does mean is that it's going to evolve in different ways. Perhaps we can call it the choreography of that debate. In 2007, at least from my perspective, as I was looking forward, and I use that word advisedly, to the debate, the elections in 2008, the debate was very vigorous, it was protracted, and pretty much by Washington standards, it was out there for everyone to see. It was pretty visible. It's going to change this year to the extent that it happens. It would seem to me, and this is not a criticism, one of the key objectives of the Obama administration has to be to try to do what it can to keep Afghanistan from becoming a political liability, from driving his party apart. To think anything differently, I think, would be unreasonable, it would be foolish, and clearly from a partisan perspective, that makes a great deal of sense. What does that mean in terms of the debate? Well, I think it means, rather than in 2007, when the discussions occurred largely in the committee rooms and on the House floor, the debate this time is going to occur in the caucus rooms in the offices of the leadership. And our responsibility as a part of the minority is to do what we can to bring clarity and transparency to that. We can't determine the outcome, but we can try to affect the process, and we're going to try to do that. We're going to work to try to preserve those things we view as absolutely essential and necessary. And that means, frankly, by and large, what the president has already outlined, a robust counterinsurgency policy that works both on paper and in the battlefield. And even more importantly, that has a successful component out in the streets and the villages, where really hearts and minds determine who wins and who loses. General Petraeus noted in his comments before the Munich Security Conference that a truly effective counterinsurgency program and effort strives to, as he puts, secure and serve the population. And then he went on to talk about what worked in Iraq and what we can apply in Afghanistan. That includes building the capacity and the capability of the Afghan National Security Forces, as well as, perhaps more importantly, giving local citizens a stake in the process, the hope for a better tomorrow, the recognition that unlike those who are trying to defeat us and trying to upset our objectives, we're here for the long haul. We need to give our Pakistan, our Afghanistan, and our ISAF partners a new objective on which we can all agree, the belief that, as I said, we're committed to this cause. That's not a half-in strategy. That's not an opportunity to say, well, we can narrow down these objectives, we can try to leave, as we have in the past, the sorry Afghan history of opportunities missed, of missions left unfulfilled, of challenges left unmet. And I have to tell you, I think this may serve as our last true opportunity to get this right. If this were Texas Hold'em, we're not going to bluff our way to this pot. We have to be all in, and again, to his credit, I think the President has given us the opportunity to do that. On our side, that means we're going to fight to do everything we can to maintain the policy as at least it was briefed to us last Friday. Now, I will tell you, it's going to be reasonable to adjust our objectives, to make the changes that are necessary on the road forward, to make sure we're responding to the realities on the ground. But I don't think that should provide an opportunity for those who previously espoused what has become kind of euphemistically known as a minimalist approach. And I worry that some of my colleagues in the House who just last fall were out on the campaign trail saying, yes, we can, and that's not a partisan statement. Both parties did it. Yes, we can, are now with respect to Afghanistan saying, well, you know what, maybe we can't, or maybe we shouldn't, or maybe we ought to pause and think about this for a while. Iraq, in the final analysis, was built simply up by a comprehensive and coherent and fully resourced counterinsurgency strategy. We can't accept anything less in Afghanistan and in the Pakistan view. Just a couple other viewpoints. Benchmarks. I support benchmarks. I was one of the first members of the House to write a bill implementing benchmarks to assess our progress or lack thereof in Iraq. But what concerns me, and what I expressed to Admiral Mullen yesterday and Secretary Gates just last week, is that benchmarks cannot be utilized to try to affect a different outcome. We can't set the bar so high as to guarantee failure or so low as to fabricate success. Troop strength. The President's made a start, but I would argue it's only a start. There seems to be some confusion as to what the number of troops General McKiernan has asked for. I was there I just returned from the region about 5 weeks ago. General McKiernan was still speaking about the need for 30,000 or so troops. The President has made a good start toward that. I believe they ought to announce the remainder of those troops now. And I believe they ought to announce them, not that that will get them to the theater necessarily any more quickly, but rather because to do it later risks sending the wrong message, risks suggesting to those who wish us ill or failure that we are not succeeding and more troops are necessary. More importantly, the announcement of the troops now suggests the earlier point I made. We are there to see this through. And from everything I know about the President, from everything I've heard, that's precisely what he wants to see happen. And for whatever it's worth, I would counsel him to do that. The focus on the training of the security forces is certainly a positive step. But I suspect many in this room believe, as I do, we need to grow those troops further, and we need to grow them faster. For all of the good effect that the President's announcement of 4,000 additional trainers does, it really doesn't do anything to accelerate the timeline. 134,000 for the Afghan National Army by the end of 2011. We have to do it better, we have to do it faster, and we're probably going to have to grow that National Army to 200,000, perhaps 250,000. With a similar increase to the Afghan National Police. I would tell you that that expansion is absolutely necessary and has to be looked at in one way and one way only, a component of a comprehensive counterinsurgency strategy. Growing the Afghan National Security Forces cannot be looked at as an alternative to a fully robust population-based COIN strategy. Let me just say in closing, the most significant name coming out of the first Gulf War, General Norman Schwarzkopf, was reported to have said, you know, the truth is we always know what the right thing is to do. The hard part is doing it. We know what the right thing to do is here. I think the president clearly articulated the right thing to do. Our job as members of Congress in the days and weeks ahead is to ensure that the resources and the means are there to carry that through. This is far too important a challenge to once again miss an opportunity. So thank you, and I look forward to your questions.